I knelt on and detonated an improvised explosive device. And there's a high possibility now that I'm going to die. At 24 years old, in the middle of a desert, thousands of miles from home, I looked down to where my legs should have been, and they had both been completely ripped off. They confirmed that I had died. They had put me on the back of a helicopter, pushed me in a corner and said, "It's game over, that guy's dead."
Joining me today is former Royal Marine who served in Iraq and then Afghanistan. He's a 4-time Invictus Games gold medalist. He's an award-winning author and motivational speaker. Mark ORMROD MBE, thanks for joining me, mate.
Thank you for having me, mate. Appreciate it.
Can you talk me through the first time you had a chance to open up on the Taliban? Because there was a lot of frustration building up to that, and then you finally had a chance to get in behind the machine gun and let loose a few rounds. Can you talk me through that situation?
Yeah, I think it was the nighttime attack that we were in. We were our base came under attack in the middle of the night. I went running down to the Sanger one of the Sangers we were looking after, Sanger 4. And
what's a Sanger?
It's basically a watchtower, or people call them different things, pillbox, where a sentry would be posted and they'd have a certain responsibility for an area that they had to watch over. And if anything came in, they reported it back. And in this situation, if you get into a contact and a firefight, then you have responsibility for that direct area. And that's what happened. We got in a firefight. We were attacked with AK-47s, RPGs and things like that. And if I remember rightly, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, the first contact that I had. And I ran down there and there was a guy in there already on the GPMG machine gun. There was a spare one sat on the other window. So I just grabbed it. Now at night, you have tracer rounds. So every third or fourth round glows red. And if they're going down range rapid enough, it's like a scene out of Star Wars. It's just these red flashes hitting things, ricocheting off. And so if you know someone's on target, you can follow their tracer. And that's what they'll often shout, watch my tracer. And you'll kind of maneuver onto their position and you know that you're hitting your target. So, I did that, got in a big firefight. Eventually, they weren't returning fire anymore. It's the middle of the night. It wasn't our job or responsibility to go and clear the area on foot after. So we stood down, got up the next day, and several dead bodies lying around in the field. The farmers came in, scooped them up, put them in some wheelbarrows, and got rid of them. So that was the first eye-opening contact for me in that tour. And I don't know if it sounds horrible or weird or what, but it went as well as could have been expected, as well as we wanted, because none of us got hurt. We neutralized the threat and we lived to fight another day.
At one point, you guys were kind of almost trapped in your base, weren't you? You were bombed for 5 weeks by the Taliban at one point, weren't you? Yeah,
it was constant, just a constant barrage of, mortars, rockets. They had a whole range of different weaponry, but yeah, it kept us restricted for quite a while. We were stuck in camp, which is very frustrating. Just sat there sitting ducks, taking incoming, frustrated that we couldn't get out on the ground and dominate like we've been doing to that point. And that's just part of it.
You've been bombed for 5 weeks. You're fully loaded. You're heading out the gate on patrol. You're pumped. Talk me through that patrol.
So we're excited to get out and stretch our legs for a bit. We are more than prepared, because it only takes a bit of time to prepare your kit, and we've been preparing it for 5 weeks. And we were ready to go. Do you know what I mean? And we set up by the headquarters compound, which was at the opposite side of the opposite end of the base now, so the top of the kidney, if you like. And we were leaving out the rear gate. Now, that's always a nerve-wracking time, because like I said earlier, that's a choke point. You've got to imagine, if you're a sniper, it's like walking out your front door. There's only so far you can go. You're there in a door frame, an easy target. So the time came and we left. I was second in command of the group that went north. The other guys went south, and we went out and did what it was that we were tasked to do. About 4.5, maybe 5 hours later, both of these sections now found themselves at the front entrance of the camp, ready to finish up for the day. And the section that I was in were on a high piece of ground. It was what we called the North Fort. It was what we call a target indicator. If we ever come into contact from the enemy, we would use that as a reference point. So we were up on the North Fort. If you look down, you could see Forward Operating Base Robinson slightly beneath us. So we could see most of that from an elevated view. And then way down beneath that, just off to the side of the main dirt road that ran through the area, was the other section that we left with. So we're in a tactically advantageous position because we can see everything around us. We can see if the enemy are approaching. And it's a lot easier to fight down a hill than it is up a hill. So we were tasked with giving that other section what we call overwatch, which basically means we protect them. We'll cover them with our weapons, let them get back in the camp. They get to the safety of the camp behind the perimeter wall. They will cover us. We will peel down off the high section, go back in the camp and finish up. So very easy, very basic. So we were given that tasking. The section commander took half of the section and started giving them fire positions and areas of responsibility. I took the other half, and about 4 meters to my front, there was a little shallow bowl in the ground. Now, normally, if you're on a patrol and you go firm, you want to get yourself behind a building, a wall, a tree, a shrub, a rock, whatever you can to give you some cover. You know, if you get fired at, you want to be able to get down and get some cover from fire and cover from view at the very least. Because we were up on this high feature and this ridgeline, effectively, we didn't have any of those luxuries. So I thought if we get in this little bowl, we all get down on our bellies, you know, you're not going to be able to see us. You know, worst case scenario, someone's going to try and fire a mortar at us. You know, that'll be the best option. And we can respond quite quickly. And then I slowly started walking over towards the position that I'd selected for myself. Now, as I got there and I went to get down onto my stomach, I put my right knee on the floor. And as I did, I knelt on and detonated an improvised explosive device.
Wow. Okay, right. So what did you think happened?
It's bizarre, actually. So you've got to imagine, right, Afghanistan, the terrain is very sandy, very dusty. So when an explosion occurs, it instantly creates a dust cloud, right? And you can't see anything. So my initial reaction was, we have been attacked. Someone's fired a mortar or a rocket on our position. It's exploded nearby. It's created this dust cloud because I couldn't see anything and I wasn't in any pain. So my adrenaline spikes and my instant initial reaction is find where the threat came from and neutralize it. Now I knew that where I was lying down on this high feature, behind me, about 600 meters, down where the other section was, so right below us, was a small rectangular forestry block, right? Just a copse of trees. Everything else around that area, like where we had that previous firefight, were just fields of mud. No crops, nothing, just bare mud. So instantly I thought, if you're going to attack us and you got any common sense, that's where you're going to do it from, because there were no other viable options in that area in my mind. So I started saying to myself in my mind, you've been attacked, turn around. ID where the enemy is in this little forestry area, start shooting. Then when the lads see that you found them, they'll all start shooting. You can make some sort of tactical withdrawal, get somewhere safer, and then figure out what we're going to do when we've got a bit of cover and we got a bit more time to think. Now, I can't see anything. I'm not in any pain. This dust cloud is temporarily blinded me. But after about 4 or 5 times, you know, in my mind, I'm saying turn around because the forest block was behind me. After about 4 or 5 times of saying that, I realized, although I couldn't see, that my body wasn't doing what my brain was telling it to do. You know, because you know instinctively, don't you? You can close your eyes and you can walk around, you know you're walking around. But I'm trying to flip around and turn around and find out where this, at least be facing this forestry block when the smoke and dust clears. And I knew my body wasn't moving, but I didn't know why. So I just waited. and you got to think, there's lads shouting and screaming at this point, trying to figure out what's going on. Your adrenaline spike, your fight or flight's kicked in, everything's going crazy. But I just thought, well, I've got to wait. And when I can see things, when this dust cloud settles, I'll assess the situation and make another call. So it got to about chest height, and I looked around, and I'm panicking now, just praying that none of my friends have been hurt or killed. I couldn't see anybody. They'd all been blasted out of this little crater that we were in. So I carried on waiting. The dust cloud got about 6 or 8 inches from the floor, hit the ground, and disappeared. Now, as it disappeared, I looked down to where my legs should have been, and they had both been completely ripped off from the knees down. It's a very surreal experience, right? So you've got to imagine, and your brain obviously has a lot of trouble trying to process what it is you're looking at. And I was in no pain, and I'm looked down, and you've got to imagine this, right? So imagine a skeleton, right, of like where your knees join. So my knee joints were there, but all my calves, my shins, everything had been, like, the flesh had been clean ripped off the bone, and my tibia and fibula was still there, covered in dust and sand. My feet were gone, incinerated. And you're looking at this like, what am I looking at? This doesn't make any sense. And your brain tries to process it. And you're like, and I remember lying there thinking, I should be in a lot of pain right now, but I'm not. Right. And everything around me is going in slow motion, but everything in my head is going at 1,000 miles an hour. Millions of thoughts trying to process this. Everything outside of my physical body was just like in slow motion. And I remember just sitting there looking like, what the fuck am I looking at? This doesn't make any sense. I can't. Anyway, probably 2 seconds later, I snap out of it because I remember about the rest of my team. And I start looking around again, trying to see them. And then I see my friend, Corporal Sean Helsby, who's in charge of the section. And, he was, the look on his face, he was clearly in a lot of shock. He had no color in his face. It had drained out. He was looking at me. We'd been friends since we went through training together in 2001. And he just looked at me with this look of horror on his face, which in my mind, when I'm looking at this thing, this isn't real. Then I'm looking at him thinking, why is he looking at that? Why does he look so shocked? And so I don't know why my thought process was like this. I just thought, right, I'm going to look back at my legs now and see if I was just daydreaming or if I'm having a nightmare or what's going on. And so I went to scan the ground to look back at my legs, and I got to about the 3 o'clock position, and I saw my arm like just lying there in the sand. It was still attached by my bicep, but from my bicep to my wrist, the whole thing had been ripped open. And, it looked like a bunch of Rottweilers had just been chewing on my arm, and there was no bone in there. There was just flesh and muscle just ripped to shreds. And my hand kind of hanging off the end of where my wrist was, just by some tendons and some flesh. And I picked it up. I don't know why. Again, no pain. I just felt really uncomfortable, like an intense pins and needles throbbing in my 3 limbs. And I looked at this hand. And as I did, the combination, I think, of looking at my legs, looking at my friend's face, and looking at my hand kind of said to me, this is happening, mate. You're in the shit right now. And I just dropped my hand into the sand and just screamed, like, from frustration when I realized that, we weren't under attack. I am the idiot that stood on an improvised explosive device. And there's a high possibility now that I'm going to die at 24 years old in the middle of a desert, thousands of miles from home. I'm not going to see Christmas Day tomorrow. Anyway, what ensued was a very chaotic but extremely professional evacuation. It involved me having to have my own foot put on my stomach when I was put on a stretcher because it was still attached by a tendon to my thigh. One of them had completely gone. One of them was still attached to my right thigh. So we had to put that on my stomach while the medic evacuated me. Then in the back of a vehicle that was evacuating me, as it was climbing back up a hill to go into the front entrance of the camp to take me into where a helicopter was called to land me, because the terrain is so uneven, you have to drive very aggressively. And as the driver was going up this incline and driving aggressively, me and the doctor fell out the back. But as I fell out the back, the driver turned around, reached out and grabbed to hold me in. And he ended up grabbing my femur that was poking out of my right thigh. And then the last thing I remember is they got me to the helicopter landing site. And I remember the helicopter landing. And then I blacked out, which was when I thought I had died. And then having met that whole medical team since that incident, they confirmed that I had died. They had put me on the back of a helicopter, pushed me in a corner and said, "It's game over. That guy's dead." Because they were busy trying to save the life of another guy who had got shrapnel wounds to his back and his upper arm. And it sounds harsh, but that's how they do it in wartime. You know, if you're not breathing, you can't get intravenous lines into you, or you're showing any signs of life, they just throw you in a corner because they got to make sure they don't have two dead guys. Luckily, one of the medics walked past me to get some equipment to go and work on the other guy, and he saw my eye flutter, which meant to him that my heart was still beating. So he alerted some of the other medics. They came over to me, and they performed a procedure on me that had only been cleared for use 3 days prior to this incident and had never been tested on a casualty in the field before. And what it basically involved was, if you can't get an intravenous line into somebody's veins, which they couldn't with me because they had all collapsed because of the blood loss, you would drill into their tibia and their fibia and you'd insert a line that way. Problem being, I didn't have any tibias or fibias because they'd been ripped off by the IED. So they decided very courageously to try for my hip. And this had never been done before. Like, it wasn't even an option. They just thought this is like a big bone here. You know, they probably had a medical reason why it was similar to a tibia and fibia. So they drilled into my hip. The first time, nothing happened. The skin was too loose. And so they tightened it up, drilled in again. Then the line managed to bite and they got fluids in me. And they said within about 3 minutes, I was awake and responsive and showing signs of life again, answering questions they were asking me back from the dead. So they then flew me back to a place called Camp Bastion. We got there. I got taken to a field hospital. The surgeons had a look at me and I was a mess. Like, just, you know, these weren't surgical amputations. These were traumatic amputations, just flesh ripped from the bone. And although, you know, I had bone below my knee and everything like that, there was no flesh on it. So they have to make a decision and they have to find where the flesh is healthy, because a lot of it dies quite quickly because of the restriction of blood flow. They have to find where the flesh is healthy and amputate there. So they amputated above both my knees and then above my elbow, my right arm, to where the flesh was healthy, because that then limits the amount of follow-up operations you have to have when you get back to the UK. So they did that. They amputated those 3 limbs, threw me on a plane, and then sent me home. And I got back home about 4:00 in the morning, Christmas Day, you know, in Steliot Hospital in Birmingham. Merry Christmas.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I'll come back to the story at that point. I just want to go back to where you were lying on the ground after the initial explosion. Didn't you ask someone to shoot you?
I did. Yeah. So like I said, you know, Sean, Corporal Helsby, the man in charge, we met in 2001 when we both started training together. So we'd known each other a while. I trusted him. And, you know, as I lay there, kind of looking at this mess of what was my body, you know, there are a lot of things that go through your mind, and they're not things you'd think of, like emotions. That, you know, it's not fear, it's not so much panic. My first thought and my first emotion was guilt. You know, I just thought, I've put all my friends now in a situation where if there's a small arms follow-up attack, if there's a bunch of Taliban waiting at the bottom of this hill to come and take people out with AK-47s, that's going to be my fault. That was my thought process. I didn't know if anyone else had been injured or killed, but immediately I thought, well, if they have, that's my fault. Then I started thinking back home. My daughter was just under 3 years old at the time, my eldest daughter. And then I was thinking, well, if I survive this, what kind of a life is she going to have? Is she going to get bullied at school? Is she going to hate me? And all these weird thoughts go running through your mind. It wasn't really about whether I was going to survive or not, because I always knew with the people I had around me and how good they were that I would survive. And so I just asked Sean, I said, look, I'm not doing this, put a bullet in the back of my head. And I took my helmet off and I kind of looked down at my chest, closed my eyes, and I just waited for what I thought would have been, like someone punching you in the back of the head. And then it'd be lights out, quick, clean, easy, job done. I'll pass out and I won't wake up. Thankfully, he didn't do that. He had a better idea. He coordinated the evacuation. They got me out of there, like I said, extremely professional. Nobody got too emotional. Nobody went against what we were trained to do, because it's not strange, but the way we're trained in that situation is not perhaps how you'd expect. And they got me out. And a combination of all those people from point of explosion right through to now, today, in this day and age, is just a culmination of just great decisions by great people, brave people that have got me to where I am.
Tell me about Becky and the family and how they got the news of what had happened.
The military liaison officers had been round and they'd spoken to my family, and my twin sister called Becky up from Plymouth and called her up in Surrey and said, Mark's been injured. Now, initially, they thought I'd just lost a foot. And obviously I wasn't there, but from what Becky and everyone said, I think she went out in the back garden of her parents' house to take the call. And her dad was looking out and she just broke down and just was hysterical. And then, one of them took the rest of the call because she couldn't take it all in. And they all just jumped in a car. I had people from Plymouth, people from Surrey, all just jumped in a car, headed to Birmingham, where I was due in within a couple of hours. And they all met me there. And bit by bit, they started to realize the severity of my injuries. It wasn't just a foot. It wasn't, I think it evolved like from a foot to a leg to two legs and an arm. As information was being received, it was being relayed to them. So, yeah, not a great Christmas for them either.
You would have been on a lot of drugs, right?
A huge amount, yeah.
Tell me about that process of when you were coming around. Obviously, you would have thought you were back in Afghanistan, wouldn't you?
No, I didn't. Some people do. I had a friend who's from Yorkshire who spoke with an American accent for 3 months because his medic was American. There's some crazy things happen. Some people do wake up and they freak out thinking they've been taken hostage or something like that. But I just remember lying there and I couldn't open my eyes. It felt like someone had put fishing hooks through my eyelids and hung weights on them. Like I remember trying so hard to open my eyes and I didn't have the energy to do it. And I had this face mask on and I could see the blurry lights from the ceiling in the room I was in, and I was gagging on a feeding tube. And so I started scratching, trying to get this feeding tube out, but the mask was in the way. And I could hear people around me and I could hear Becky. And every time someone spoke, it would echo like 3 or 4 times, I think because of the medication. But they took the mask off, they pulled the feeding tube out, and I was really weak. I could hardly speak at all. And I could hear Becky out my right-hand side. And I had already been writing a letter to her dad while I was in Afghanistan, trying to be, a bit old school and chivalrous and asking for permission. And when I heard her, I couldn't see her because I just didn't have the energy to open my eyes. She took the mask off and I just kind of mumbled really quietly, will you marry me? And she said, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. Say it again. So I tried. And in the end, I think inside I was like, Jesus Christ, what do I have to do here? You know what I mean? I'm trying my hardest. But she just repeated back. She said, did you just ask me to marry you? And I just kind of gave this little crooked smile and passed out. It just took me like the world's amount of energy just to do that. And then I just conked back out because I was done. But yeah, she agreed. She said, yeah. And then on the 28th of December, I don't know what day it was that was, but on the 28th, they reduced me on the medication, brought me out the coma, still heavily medicated and hallucinating and everything. But, you know, they brought me back into the real world where I could make a bit more sense of what was actually going on.
You met Prince Harry and William along the way, didn't you? You had a bit to do with them.
Yeah, a couple of times we've been to a couple of social events together over the years for the military. I did the Invictus Games. It was Prince Harry's baby. We did that twice. Yeah, I mean, like I said, in all these bad situations, a lot of good comes from it. So I've got to meet a lot of cool people,
Yeah.
go to a lot of cool events, and do a lot of cool things that I probably wouldn't have done had this not happened.
Obviously, Harry and William are, part of the British military, were part of the British military. I'm not sure what their situation is now, but how cool was it for them to come and visit you guys and sit down and actually get involved in what you were doing?
I think it was really cool on two different levels. First of all, myself being just what you call a junior NCO, to have officers come along and give up their time to check on you and make sure you're all right and genuinely want to be there and genuinely care was cool. But then obviously they're members of the royal family as well, so they would come all the time when their schedule allowed, and it was never really. There was one or two times when it was press were involved, but a lot of the time it was just a private environment, no cameras, no reporters, just one-on-one, being real, making sure everyone's all right and helping where they can. Just really cool people.
Is it frustrating when you see how much, I mean, we're going off on a tangent here, but is it frustrating when you see how much grief they get in the press considering the service that they've gone through for the country?
Yeah, it is. I never comment on it. I don't think it's my place to. And I've had the media ringing me up the last week or two, actually asking me to do stories about this, and I just turn it down because, it's not my business, and I'm not trying to make a name on myself by being that kind of person. But it does frustrate me, yeah, because people forget very quickly. For like, God, what I was going to say 10 years, but 10 years that I'm aware, 10 years plus, where everybody was just singing their praises, especially when the Invictus Games came around. And then all of a sudden, like that, the complete opposite, do a 180, and it's all this negativity. And I'm not a big fan of that with anybody, let alone people that have served their country at the level that they have. Put yourself in that situation. Okay. You're a member of the royal family, right? You've got a great life. You do these incredible things, and that can continue forever. So why would you want to put yourself in danger where you could potentially end up like me or dead? Yeah, I think it takes a different kind of person to step up and do that. Do you know what I mean? It's and a lot of people I think forget that. They don't have to do that. Harry was on the front line. You know what I mean? Fighting on the front line as a prince. He didn't have to do that. It could have had devastating effects, even mentally. It could have had devastating. And we're all targets, but that's a much more high profile target where a lot of people would have been, gathering around to try and get that win. Do you know what I mean? So I think some people need to think about that sometimes. It's a very brave decision to go and do that. And then afterwards, I honestly think that we, as in the wounded, injured, and sick veteran community from Iraq and Afghanistan, would have a very different quality of life now, a much worse one, had it not been for a lot of the stuff that they pushed. And I'll even go as far to saying, as veterans from conflicts past, Kosovo, Bosnia, the Falklands, the first Gulf War, all this stuff. They had it a lot rougher than we do, right? And if anyone says any different, then they're stupid. But I think that their, don't know how to describe it. I'm going to say quality of life and their status as a veteran has been vastly increased. They haven't been forgotten about. Before, I think they had. But with Iraq and Afghanistan and the royal involvement, it's elevated veteran status, and there's been so many things and so many more perks that have come about now as a result of being a veteran across the board that I don't think would be a thing now had it not been for their involvement.
Your involvement in the Invictus Games, which is obviously Harry's baby, almost didn't come about originally, didn't it?
Yeah, sport was never part of my recovery. I mean, I say this all the time. It's really funny, but my experience was that whenever I'd meet someone new, they would always ask me when I was going to start training for the Paralympics. Like it was something you had to do if you were disabled. And I'm like, look, my background was martial arts. I can't do that now. I've never sprinted 100 meters. I've never done the long jump. I've never done the high jump. Those things don't interest me. So I'm not going to do sport. I want to learn how to use my legs, leave my wheelchair behind, and go out and get a job and live my life. But I saw the Invictus Games. I saw the first one in London. I got invited up to the closing ceremony. And so I only saw the end of it, but the atmosphere was insane. And then I saw my friends go to Florida the year after. And a lot of them won medals, which is great. But because I knew them outside of that environment, I saw how much of a positive impact it had on their recovery and their lives. And then in 2016, I was sat exactly where I am now, in this room, at this desk, and I was goal setting for 2017 like I do every year. And I realized that Christmas Eve 2017 was my 10-year anniversary. And so I thought, what can I do to celebrate 10 years that I haven't done before? And it was sport. So I'd seen these two previous Invictus Games. I saw how positive the impact they had on the guys that were taking part and their families. So I thought, I'll give that a shot. You know what I mean? It can't be that hard. I've seen the sports they do. I never thought I'd get in because I wasn't in any of those cliques. I had never sat on a rowing machine before. I had tried swimming once and seriously nearly drowned because of the way swimming works differently for me. I nearly killed myself the first time I tried. I'd never ridden a handbike before. Never done any of these things, but I just thought, you know what? Go big or go home. Let's just see if we can get in a team, and then we'll worry about figuring stuff out after that. And that's what I did. I was lucky enough to make the team. Competed the first year in Canada, did okay. Didn't do as well as I wanted to do, so went back in Australia, righted some wrongs, dropped the mic, and walked off into the sunset.
Mark ORMROD, thank you very much for coming on the show, but most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you, mate. It's been great. I've had a lot of fun. Thank you.
It's been a good show. If you want to learn more about Mark, make sure you visit his website, markormond.com. And if you're looking for a book to read, you cannot go past his award-winning true story, Man Down. It's getting made into a movie, isn't it?
It is. It is getting made into a movie, yeah. Annoyingly, like a week before lockdown, right back when this all started, we signed the contracts to do that, and then everything got put on hold. So we have been making progress. There's a lot of, I'm sure you can imagine, like the boring stuff that goes on behind the scenes that I don't know anything about. So the team were working hard on that. Scripts, funding, locations, actors, talent, all that kind of stuff.
Who's playing you?
I don't know yet. We've had a lot of conversations. We've thrown a few names around. So one name that people have been bringing up is Joe Cole, not the footballer.
Right.
He was in Peaky Blinders. He was the lead actor in Gangs of London.
Right.
I'm going to forget more now. Jack O'Connell was a name.
Right. Okay.
So
who's your preference?
I don't know. The difficulty is I was 24 years old, right?
Yeah.
So I'm 37 now. I need to find someone young and up and coming who can play a 24-year-old. So that's the difficulty. We've got a meeting booked for a couple of weeks' time, so I think we're gonna kind of niche down now and start reaching out. Now things are starting to go back to normal, because the problem as well is none of them know what their schedules are, because they've all been knocked out of sync. So there's only so much we can do, but we're gonna work on this now and then start reaching out. I think we're gonna have to come to a final decision.
Oh, well, best of luck with it.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for listening. A massive thank you if you've left us a review already. I've been blown away by all your support. And if you like this interview, feel free to let us know. And it'll be amazing if you could share it with your mates as well. We'll talk again next week.